Hey, folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board. Tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit about fans versus the brand. Um, it's uh, it's not something I think that a lot of people think about first thing when they're thinking about setting up their IP or telling a story. But it is very important that you have a very specific brand, that you present yourself in a very specific way, that you make it clear that you are going to tell a certain story, and you make that very recognizable and memorable in people's minds. And unfortunately, in especially under American copyright law, how you do that will sometimes put you at odds with your fan community. Now, this topic was brought to mind by the Vic Mignogna. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but the voice actor situation where he had some very odd sounding accusations raised against him, and the one that really brought it up. Put this subject in my mind was he refused to sign some pieces of fan art people brought him, and I have seen some people kind of suggest that it was kind of a impolite, unkind, uncharitable thing to do. Um, and Vic's defense of this was that he didn't want to sign anything that was non-canon or anything that you know wasn't official merchandise. And it's an interesting contrast there. Now, before I get into that any deeper, um, I don't really have a opinion on most of the accusations, um, factual accusations that have been brought against Vic Mignogna. I wasn't there for any of them. There doesn't seem to be any video of these things available. Some pictures have been circulated, and a lot of them have been proven to be of questionable value. So I'm just not going to make a call on it either way. I don't have the time and resources to do a full investigation, and I think accusations like that, people who don't have the time and resources for a thorough investigation, I should just keep their mouths shut. So that's what I'm going to do. Um, but on this particular subject, on the question of, um, did he make a good decision in interacting with his fans by not signing fan art? Um, that is, I think, is less a question of factual events and more a question of what is good policy. And there are a lot of things there to think about. The biggest one is, he made I think Vic made a very good point. He said, I'm here as an official representative of, certain properties, and he didn't feel it was correct for him to, endorse products that didn't pay back into um, the owners of those properties. I mean, after all, he was a representative of big name franchises, things like Full Metal Alchemist, and I'm sure he got paid quite well. And when you're riding the gravy train, it's kind of your job to make sure that the people paying your paycheck, they get their due. So I don't really hold that against him. I think that's a pretty good justification for his not signing fan art. But in the general scheme of things, it gets a little more complicated. I think it's a good thing if you're interested in indie comics or anything like that, to think about the principles at work there. So much of small publishing is driven by social media these days. You have to ask yourself, um, how 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 far can I interact with fans without impacting the brand? Um, and fan art is great. It shows that your community is invested and responding to it, encourages your fans to be even more invested, to continue to build hype, not only in their own mind, but through word of mouth, through their connections through social media, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, what have you. On the other side of the coin, a fan base that is, it is possible to have a fan base that is too invested in their headcanons, in the way they want things to be. You've seen that pretty clearly in a lot of cartoon fan bases these days. There was the final episode of Adventure Time and all the hullabaloo that went about that when a fan ship was confirmed, even though the rest of the show lore didn't really seem to support it. Of course, just about anyone who's been on the internet for more than a year knows how toxic the Steven Universe fandom can be. And a lot of that is really outside of the control of you as a creator. But when it comes to interactions with the brand, you have to give it some thought. Now, this isn't like you have to be the thought police. You don't have to look at every piece of fan art and vet it or anything like that. But you do have to maintain certain barriers. You can't read fan fiction. That's not just to maintain your brand from a legal point of view. That is the absolute safest way to go, because reading fan fiction, believe it or not, can get you in all kinds of legal trouble. It's far better to be able to say that if somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I wrote this fan fiction that happened in your story in real life, so cut me off some of that cheese." It's just a lot better to be able to say, "No, I never read fan fiction. It's cool that you thought of this separate for me, but it was separate for me." So, try and avoid fan fiction. You can't not look at other people's art. But if people come to you specifically pitching ideas for storylines, for costume designs, for character designs, steer clear of that. Again, you need to be able to draw a very clear line and say, this is my creative work, and it is going to go where I want it to go. And especially from a legal standpoint, you do need to be able to say, I was in the driver's seat the whole time, and this was my IP, these were my ideas, and no one else has claim to them. Now, I'm not saying be rude to people and say, I can't look at your ideas because I want to be able to do whatever I want. No, just say it's unwise for any creator to read fan fiction or to accept fan suggestions for storylines or props or costume ideas, things like that. Don't forget too that like Vic, you do kind of have an obligation to try and make sure that the people who help you establish your brand are being recognized and being compensated for their work. There's nothing wrong with fan art. There's nothing wrong with fan art being shared around. But don't don't endorse that product by putting your name on it, unless you are getting, your piece of the pie. Um, and there are, so some of those things are going to be your own judgment calls. I know that there's been some hubbub about Cyberfrog popping up on other people's covers, and if you're going to do something like that, just make sure that there's a clear chain of permission, so that it's clear that the owner and creator of a character, like Ethan, is in the in control of the character of Cyberfrog. Just make it clear that there's still a clear stamp of ownership there, and by the same token, if say there's someone selling fan art of your characters, that's something you need to look at very hard. And you need to be ready to move in on that. The legal side of copyright is actually very strict, and if you don't enforce it, it actually makes it harder to enforce it in the future. So that's something to consider too. I'm not a lawyer. I've read up a little bit on copyright, although it has been a while. But yeah, even I'm not saying like signing a piece of fan art or something like that is, in a legal sense, authorizing it, or making it clear and okay from a legal standpoint with you. But the further you stay away from those gray areas, the better it will be for you and for your brand. So as you interact with fans and you look at brand, these are the things to keep in mind. And I think I'm not calling myself an expert, but I think that as creator-owned IPs become a bigger and bigger part of the comics landscape, these are things that creators are going to need to start to think about and talk about. Maybe even just hammer out some ground rules as we go along. And I actually find these subjects really interesting thought experiments, things to think over. My dad is an engineer. I went to engineering school for a year, so I like to look for. I like to ask myself the question: what could go wrong? Where are the points of failure? How can we get around them? I think it's just fun to think about those kinds of things. Maybe that makes me weird. I don't know. But yeah, so like fans versus brand, where are the lines? What are the good ways to deal with it? Just some thoughts on that subject. And I know there's a lot of nuance to it, which you could go on about for hours. But those are just my thoughts as of right now. So I hope you enjoyed that. And there's a like and a subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.